Today's video will be slightly different from my usual roundabouts content, because today I'll be focusing on Mariomon. Mariomon is a game made by Alfred and friends, and it's a fan-made Pokemon style game inspired by Mario. From it, competitive communities have emerged. There's been both a singles community and a doubles community, but this video will focus on the singles community since I'm a singles player myself. I've seen people often come onto the Pokeathlon server and ask, so where do I begin? And it's a valid question, because while there are sample teams and sets, there's nothing really to explain how they work. So you end up just having to ball it with a sample team to even understand what the mons do themselves. So in the next few videos, I'll be trying to break down what the captures do themselves, so hopefully it's a little bit easier to get into the format. I'll be first going over the capture itself, looking at the stats and its move pool, and then I'll also look through different sets that the capture uses, and then look at how they work on different team types. And then we'll look through some replays to see the capture in action. And finally, I'll give my personal opinion regarding where it's rated on the viability ranking. Today I'll be exploring Bonetail in Mariomon OU. This thing is essentially a legendary in the game, 580 stat total, so the stats are inevitably pretty strong overall. It's got solid bulk, it's also got good offense and special offense. 100 special attack is not bad at all. The only issue is it gets Draco Meteor, Shadow Ball, and Flamethrower really as options. So you don't really ever see special attacking Bonetail. The speed you may think is bad, 75 isn't the best, but in Mariomon the speed levels are actually quite low overall, so 75 speed isn't that bad, especially if you invest in the speed. You can outspeed quite a lot of the tier with 75. And then looking at the move pool, there aren't much special moves, but there's a bunch of physical moves. You get great coverage like Earthquake, Play Rough, and Shadow Bone, which is one of the only good physical attacking ghost type moves, because you only have like Poltergeist and then Shadow Sneak, I guess, because it's priority. But Shadow Bone is like basically the next best, so that's a really good option for Bonetail to have. And then you have moves like Iron Head as well if you want to cover for fairies. And then of course you also do have Dragon Dance, which is always going to be good on a mon like this, especially since it also gets multi-scale. And multi-scale not only allows it to set up easier, it also makes it really good defensively. And the Ghost type also helps it defensively because it acts as a rapid spin blocker. And that's really nice because in this tier there are, if we look at Defog, which is the only other way to clear hazards in this game, you have these four guys, well, these three really, and none of them are really common to see. Puro is kind of viable with Defog, Spindrift can work as well, but it's kind of a dead weight sometimes, and then Parabiddy is just bad overall. You really don't generally want to be using this unless it's for a very specific reason. So you don't really have to worry about Defog, but Rapid Spin you do need to worry about in terms of clearing hazards, but then Bonetail covers this quite well. The only mons that actually threaten Bonetail may be Dry Bones because it can knock off, but then at the same time Bonetail could Will-O-Wisp it. Goopa Bloopa has a strong Ice Beam as well, Paratrooper has Triple Axle, but then again Bonetail can Will-O-Wisp. So out of all of these, not many of them can actually beat them if it's defensive, because Shoeboyd you might think it's got Corrosion, it's got Toxic, you might think that it just poisons Bonetail to death, but defensive Bonetail, which is the first set that we're going to cover, it gets rest, and it runs Will-O-Wisp as well to cripple physical attackers. Shadow Bone is a very good stab option to hit Lubba, which is essentially the Blissey equivalent of the game, but it's got a different typing. It's got Psychic and Fairy, so that's weak to Ghost. Without Shadow Bone, you're not really actually threatening Lubba out because you're not really doing enough damage. There's a 20% chance to drop defense as well, which is really scary for Lubba. Knockoff works well if you're running Hazard Stack. As I mentioned earlier, there's not really many ways to clear hazards with defensive Bonetail, so having Knockoff synergizes with the idea of adding Hazard Stack because you knock off all of the heavy duty boots. You could also run other moves like Earthquake to threaten Goopa Bloopa, which it's nice to basically 2-hit KO Goopa Bloopa with Earthquake, even with no attack investment really. Otherwise, Shadow Bone knockoff, Goopa Bloopa is kind of fine with just Ice Beaming through those moves. In terms of EVs for defensive Bonetail, you could go max HP, max defense. You could also go max special defense. Since Will-O-Wisp already cripples physical attackers, you could also run like really low speed. For example, 190 speed outspeeds Gooper Bloopers, who go for 190 speed sometimes, so that after a rapid spin, they can outspeed max speed base 80 mods. So it's a nice tier to go for 190. But you could also just go max HP for simplicity, and that's basically what defensive Bonetail is more or less. There are also offensive variants. This one is Dragon Dance 3 attacks. You run heavy duty boots and weakness policy, both of them taking advantage of multi-scale. By the way, Cursed Body does exist, and that's as much as I have to say about it. You're never running Cursed Body ever. But back to the set. Heavy duty boots makes use of multi-scale because it prevents it from being broken by hazards. Weakness policy also makes use of multi-scale because it allows you to take super effective hit pretty safely. Like, it's very, very difficult to one-shot Bonetail with multi-scale up. And then these three are essentially, the sample set had dual chop. So if you decide to go to the sample set to make use of 3 attack Bonetail, I would suggest getting rid of dual chop because it doesn't really do much, I would say. I think play rough is a better option. These 3 attacks generally cover more stuff than dual chop would. So I think these are the 3 main attacks to go for. And in terms of EVs, there's no issue with just going max attack, max speed. So the issue with this set is you can kind of get crippled by Will-O-Wisp and Glare. So to deal with that, some other offensive Bonetail sets just run Chesterberry with Rest. That heals, first of all, brings back multi-scale, so it's actually viable. And then you get rid of all the statuses, which is very nice. The issue is you get less coverage, but against the right team, it can be quite strong. Your moves can also be quite varied, again, as is usual with Bonetail. You can just go Earthquake, Shadowbone. The EVs, by the way, they're a bit more complex over here. So you go 192 speed, and this allows you to hit 351 speed when you have +1 speed after Dragon Dance. And 351 speed is able to outspeed the base 110s, and that's a pretty important speed tier to outspeed. And running 150 attack with a plus nature just about allows you to outspeed a Lubba that has max HP, max defense. So this set is trying to be extremely minimalistic in terms of how much attack and speed it gets, and then invest as much as it possibly can into bulk. To kind of synergize with the idea of Chesto Rest. So it's a more bulky, more like consistent, reliable version of the Dragon Dance 3 attack set because of the fact that it can just refresh all of its statuses with Rest. And then there's another annoying set which instead of Rest just runs Will-O-Wisp with HGB. This set goes more into offense. It follows the same idea as before, where you only go 192 speed so that you can outspeed the 350s, because that's more or less most of what you need to outspeed, and then just go the rest into bulk. But Will-O-Wisp is really annoying because you can just cripple physical attackers and then after that just spam Dragon Dance, which can be really annoying to face if you don't see it coming. So Bonetail, the fact that there's so much variety in the offensive sets you could run, it can actually be very scary just for that reason. Now, to finish off covering the basics of Bonetail, I thought it would be worth covering the basic Bonetail counterplay that exists as well. Blog is really good against Bonetail because it outspeeds and it hits with a really strong high special attack Draco or Dragon Pulse. Crystal King is interesting because you do need to get rid of multi-scale to win the matchup. Crystal King is scary for Bonetail to face. Fishbone is also very bad because Banded Shadowbone can do a lot of damage. Gloomtail is bad because outspeeding knockoff, super effective attack, and knockoff Bonetail doesn't like getting knocked off a lot. It also gets Sucker Punch, so it can outspeed Dragon Dance variants. Gooper Blooper can Ice Beam it, so it depends on the set, but Gooper Blooper can be a bit of an issue for Bonetail. Hooktail also, similar to Blog, is a pretty strong special attacker, usually runs Choice Specs, so it can just go Choice Specs Draco, which hurts Bonetail a lot. Mad Piano is also not a fun matchup for Bonetail. If Bonetail still has his item, Poltergeist is a very, very annoying move to play around. It also does get Sucker Punch. Moray is a good defensive switch in because it gets Intimidate, so it can weaken Bonetail and safely swap in. And then maybe like Glare, Earthquake it. And Mr. Blizzard gets a really powerful Blizzard, and then it also gets a defense boost due to being an ice type and having the ability Snow Warning, making Bonetail struggle to KO it, and then also takes massive damage from Stab Blizzard. Paratrooper can annoy it a lot with Triple Axle, but then it also can just get burnt. Puro is really annoying as well. It can kind of beat Puro because it can kind of cripple it with Will-O-Wisp or beat it with Play Rough on an offensive set. However, Puro does have a lot of speed and it does have a very strong stab knockoff, so it can actually beat Bonetail. Spike Top is a really good Bonetail overall wall. Will-O-Wisp is a bit annoying to play around, but then you can just force Bonetail to rest, and offensive variants Spike Top can essentially full wall. T-Rex also can beat Bonetail with Mold Breaker and Dragon Stab with 130 attack. Yub generally could wall Bonetail as well. Curse outpaces the Dragon Dance because Bonetail will struggle to do enough damage. However, if Yub comes in on like a +2 Bonetail, Bonetail is probably going to end up beating it with Play Rough. So Yub can win in a 1v1, but it can't swap into a setup Bonetail really. Fuzzy, as long as you have the schooling form up, you get 130 attack, and 130 attack stab knockoff, if you're running speed, can be quite annoying to deal with. And it also has ridiculous bulk as well, so you can Will-O-Wisp it, but it's not a fun matchup to be in. And Hand Fake as well, also not a fun matchup. Stab knockoff, stab sucker punch, again can be Will-O-Wisped. However, it has a really high attack stat and it does get Swords Dance. So if you anticipate Will-O-Wisp, you can just go Swords Dance knockoff and it will do an insane amount of damage. Does have good bulk due to having 105 HP. So even if it does have 60 defense, it can tank an attack usually. And that more or less covers Bonetail by itself. Next, we're going to look at some team structures that make use of Bonetail and see the role Bonetail plays in those teams. So in this team, the team's focus is mainly on setting up hazards. This Poison Pokey has Toxic, Debris and Spikes to just set up a bunch of hazards. Essentially it's just a hazard stack team. And then it has Bonetail over here with defensive. It's got special defense investment, so it's a specially defensive variant. It doesn't have Will-O-Wisp, so it can't actually touch Dry Bones, but this set really works well on hazard stack because Poison Pokey sets up the hazards, Bonetail just makes sure nothing can rapid spin, and then the game progresses from there. It also has knockoff. This one has knockoff, Poison Pokey has knockoff. Puro also has knockoff, so that means you can get rid of anyone trying to use heavy duty boots to prevent hazards from hurting them just by knocking them all off. So I think because it's a hazard stack team, knockoff works quite nicely. And Earthquake hits stuff like Gooper Blooper nicely, so that's probably why Will-O-Wisp was taken out, just because there'll probably be some matchups that Bonetail wants to beat a bit better with Earthquake. Doesn't have any attack investment by the way, but it still does really good damage to Gooper Blooper. The role Bonetail plays over here is just to make sure the hazard stack stays alive. And it really makes this team very scary to play against if you don't have something that can clear hazards and beat Bonetail. So that's an example of a defensive Bonetail. This is an example of a Bonetail team that's in just a pure stall team. This one's defense invested with some speed to hit the 190 speed tier. And then it has Will-O-Wisp. It's got a more standard set over here with Will-O-Wisp knockoff Shadow Bone. Essentially, this is the same one in the samples. And the role is just also to just be annoying. The Spike Top sets up the spikes over here, and then Bonetail comes in and just prevents spinning from ever happening. It's a nice wall overall. It's just very annoying to break through if you don't have the right options. Spin Drift over here is interesting because it defogs on Bonetail switching, so it can actually not get hurt by hazard stack because the spin blocker can't swap into it because it just defogs anyway. And then Paratroop is also an interesting mon anti-Bonetail Pokemon that also gets rapid spin. So this individual has made it very difficult for people to hazard stack on them because the two rapid spinners, the two hazard clearers are pretty annoying for Bonetail to swap into. Let's take a look at some more offensive variants as well. This one is interesting. I'm not sure what the 220 speed is for. Alright, okay, I figured it out. So the 220 speed is to outspeed any 60 speed max speed Pokemon. Capture. So as you can see, anything with 60 base, if you're not running a speed boosting nature, you hit 219. So hitting 220 specifically allows Bonetail to outspeed this thing and then earthquake it and probably just destroy its entire life. This thing might struggle a bit from speed because with one Dragon Dance, there's a lot of things that still doesn't outspeed. It doesn't even hit 350 speed, but it can work on its own set. It's a multi-scale set. Sorry, it's a weakness policy set, which can be very scary to play into if you accidentally proc it without realizing its weakness policy. And then you have the 3 attacks that I think are also probably the best 3 attacks you can give on Bonetail because it covers the most options. So once the weakness policy is activated, sometimes the game can just end because you get so much attack after one Dragon Dance, and then adding on the weakness policy, this thing can be so scary. And then also you have a team I made with the Dragon Dance Bonetail. It's also an offensive one. It's offensive 3 attacks and it runs the Lumberry. And again, it's really scary. There's two things. There is Phanto and there's Spark that outspeed this once you've got up one Dragon Dance. But I think I preferred being able to just outspeed everything and go max speed. And that's why I've gone max speed on this set over here. Bear in mind though that this team doesn't work anymore because PT and Exor have just been banned. So unfortunately this team is no longer relevant, but we'll still check a replay with them anyway and see the Royal Bonetail plays. So this is the first replay. This is quite a long replay, so I'll only cover the moments where Bonetail was specifically relevant. Now, we've already looked at both of these teams. Well, both these players at least. This person has actually switched the Spindrift from the sample team to Mollusk, which is fair. And you may think, okay, now how do you rapid spin easily with Mollusk? Because Mollusk can't deal with Bonetail. But we'll find out how that goes in the match. And then this guy's also using a team that we've covered in the samples, a Hazard stack team. So let's look over how the match ends up going. So Poison Pokey, of course, can kind of threaten Bonetail. It's got Rocky Helmet. This one's got Rocky Helmet to make this thing not really have its multi-scale, and then Poison Pokey will also be able to knock off the Bonetail, which is quite nice in a stall matchup. However, this is why Bonetail runs Will-O-Wisp, because now it can just safely Will-O-Wisp and make sure the knockoff just literally does 14% only. Mollusk comes in, it's going to probably try and rapid spin, and that's where Bonetail comes in, and it can't rapid spin. It's scalded and it wasn't able to rapid spin, and now he has to deal with, now the opponent has to deal with a T-Spike and a Spike at the same time. Now this turn over here is interesting, because the Mollusk reveals on this turn that it gets Soak, which means it can actually be Bonetail, because if you Soak into Bonetail, it turns into a water type and then you can just rapid spin on it. So that means the Mollusk actually has tech to make Bonetail not a pain to deal with. Otherwise Bonetail would be really annoying for this team to fight. And sure enough, they were able to Soak and rapid spin the Bonetail. So that's some way to counter a defensive Bonetail. Of course, it's not as good if the Bonetail ends up being offensive. That just Dragon Dances and sweeps you completely. But if you know you're fighting a defensive Bonetail, then having Soak Mollusk, that's actually a tech that you can run to counterplay Bonetail, essentially, to make sure you can rapid spin on Bonetail with a Pokemon with a Mon that can't really do much into Bonetail naturally. However, what's interesting is that Sif can't actually rapid spin off the spikes himself. He actually has to worry about that massively because he doesn't have Bonetail counterplay. He's only rapid spinner, unless Pure is running Defog, which we've checked it's not. The set that the sample team that we saw is basically is the same as the team they're using here. It doesn't have Defog. The only rapid spinner he has can't come in on Bonetail, so he has to keep worrying about the spikes on every turn, and that's where you see the value of Bonetail. And in a long match like this, which is very stally and involves a lot of switches, it's quite impactful to have the spikes up for the entire game. And you literally can't do anything about it. And that's about as much Bonetail is really doing in this game. And because the replay is quite long, I'm not going to cover the entire thing. But we got to see some interesting things. We got to see actual Bonetail counterplay from what should be something that Bonetail can easily swap into to prevent rapid spin. And then we also got to see Bonetail actually in action, keeping the spikes up for the entire game. So that's example of two defensive. They're two different variants, but they're both defensive Bonetails, like two bulky Bonetails. So that was a nice showcase of Bonetail just being annoying as a defensive mon. Let's check more offensive Bonetails though. Now, looking at the opponent's team, I've already showed you the Bonetail I'm running here. My Bonetail can actually beat the Lubber on his team. Moray is a bit of an issue. And then Bonetail, I'll need to get a bit of ship off to break the multi-scale. Puro, I will also need to get a little bit of ship on because it has Brave Bird with Gale Wings, which is a bit annoying. But that's not too hard. I basically destroy 2 of his mons. Well, 3 of his mons, really. And just have to cripple these 3 a little bit, and then I can win the game. So let's see how Bonetail ends up playing. So Bonetail is a win con in this game. So I start off going into Gooper Blooper because Gooper Blooper actually just destroys Poison Pokey. I can just surf on turn 1 and kill it. And then I go into my Lubber because I'm expecting a Draco, which will hurt Gooper Blooper quite a bit. I just hard TP out because I'm expecting Poison Pokey to come in. And I just surf over here. Now I could have Ice Beamed on the Bonetail read, but I was also kind of thinking Lubber make it come in over here. And as I explained earlier, this Gooper Blooper can actually do quite a bit against Bonetail because it tanks an Earthquake quite well, and then I can just Ice Beam for solid damage. However, I can't stay in forever because this one's got Earthquake. I have to be a bit careful about that. And then I go into my PT because I can set up now if I get the chance, and Poison Pokey can't do too much. So I can set up a Soul Dance. It can't afford to set up Hazards. It has to go for Barb Barrage to break my sub, or else it just loses. And then I Acrobatics, and then the Poison Pokey does a lot of damage to me back. Doesn't poison me with the 50%, and then I'm able to break through this. Now, this is where his Puro comes into play, because now it just has priority attack over here, dual wing beat, didn't miss, it killed the guy. And then I just put an Exor because Exor just destroys Puro. I Sacred Sword because I expect this the Moray to come in. Moray can actually be a really annoying tank for Exor, but Sacred Sword, as you saw, did 50% almost, which is insane. Almost killed the entire Moray, and if I can go for Sucker Punch here to outspeed it, and then the Moray is dead. Now Moray, if you don't remember, was actually a really big concern for my Bonetail because it has Intimidate, and it's also Physical Wall. So getting rid of that is nice. Now all I need is, Bonetail is chipped enough, I don't have to worry about Bonetail anymore. All I need to do is chip the Puro just like even 1 HP, and then my max speed Bonetail can Dragon Lance sweep the entire game, and the opening I have is Lubber. So if I can get Lubber to come in, and I go into Bonetail, and I just get a free Dragon Lance, and I can win the entire game, if I can chip down Puro. So let's see how it goes from here. Gooper Blooper clears the Toxic Spikes, and now all of the progress of Poison Pokey is gone. I like Gooper Blooper here because Poison Pokey is dead. I no longer need to Rapid Spin on anything. And then Lubber can just come in on here. I hard TP out. Oh, I don't hard TP out. I go for Moonblast. I go for Moonblast because it does solid damage against Hooktail and really everything he has. And if he puts in his own Lubber, then I can teleport. And then he goes Puro, which is so good for me because Puro is the one thing that I was scared of. Now that Puro is dead, I have such an easy chance to just win with Bonetail Dragon Dance. And it dies, by the way, because Puro has pretty bad special defense, and it's also weak to Moonblast. So I go into Blarg because it can tank this quite nicely, and then one-shot it back with Draco Meteor. But then he goes into Lubber, and I go into my own Lubber because I don't want to swap in Bonetail just yet. I just go for a Moonblast here. Don't think I value Lubber too much, but then I think I changed my mind and then go into this guy because I can just basically wall it. Lubber's coming in. I go for Overheat to just get some chip at least. And then I go into Bonetail because I think I can, if it stays in for whatever reason, to Wish maybe, then I can just win the game from there. It goes into Hooktail. And then I can just go into Lubber. Trick isn't too relevant. I'm kind of already okay with kind of sacking Lubber. The only thing I need, I kind of do need Lubber though. I still need Lubber. And that was the opening, right? I do need Lubber because I need to be able to beat Hooktail, and it's the only thing that can beat Hooktail directly. Like if Hooktail comes in on Bonetail or something, then I could just be cooked. Although it doesn't have a Specs anymore. So I just Wish up on this turn, and then I go into Bonetail because I know I can easily heal up a Moonblast damage. It does only 24, and then I heal that up. And now, at this point, Dragon Lance, he's lost the game. It's checkmate. Dragon Lance just wins the entire game because the Bonetail is chipped, and then everything else just dies to either Shadow Bone or Earthquake, and sure enough, the entire game is over. And in the late game, it can be such a deadly cleaner, it's not even funny. And now let's check another Bonetail game. This one is a funny game over here. Another two Bonetails game. This Bonetail, judging by the team style, it looks very stally. So I think Stealth Rock spikes, maybe T-spikes over here, and then Bonetail just spin blocks the entire thing. This team though is actually running a weakness policy Bonetail, and we'll see that in action. Exor just comes in, tanks the Will-O-Wisp, tanks the Toxic with Lumberry, and then just one-shots the entire Shrewboard with Swords Dance, which is why it's just ridiculously broken. This guy can actually, like, Spike Top's not a counter. He can just get Sacred Sworded and it just dies. And sure enough, Spike Top just dies. Now, let's see what comes in here. Mollusk, not really the best swap in because it can still Sacred Sword and it'll do like 80. But he swapped out anyways, and Sousa swapped out Interlubber, which is a nice safe swap in. Wished over here, and then came in Exor because why not? Just tanks the entire guy. Can just Behemoth Blade and then it'll do so much damage. Watch, Earthquake doesn't even do 50 and then Behemoth Blade does 33. Considering that this is multi-scale, it does like 60 at least without multi-scale. However, it's got Earthquake, has to swap out. Yellow Yoshi comes in. It can get the knockoff. Does it go for the knockoff? Let's see. Because the Leftovers is really annoying. Okay. Leftovers I was going to say is really annoying because it just synergizes with multi-scale annoyingly. But copycatting the Will-O-Wisp is quite nice because you basically eliminated Leftovers and crippled Bonetail's defensive power, which is really nice to do. Although, if it is stall, it should have rest. He doesn't have rest, I've just realized. This is a Bonetail that's not running rest. And sure enough, here we are, right? We see a very interesting sequence of events. Let's go back a little bit. Sousa led the Bonetail Will-O-Wisp here. So, for that reason, there is no more need to actually use Will-O-Wisp. Like, it's not going to double Will-O-Wisp into Bonetail. And it also copycat Will-O-Wisp to Bonetail to just make it do less damage. And then it also gets rid of the knockoff. Now knockoff actually probably would be better to swap into, I would argue. Maybe Sousa was playing around the double Will-O-Wisp. But because knockoff, it'll probably take less damage from knockoff considering it's not stab. And then weakness policy should still activate. But regardless, played it safe for one turn, took the knockoff on Yellow Yoshi and then swapped into the Shadow Bone on his own Bonetail, triggers the weakness policy, and look at the team, it's full of fat, slow Pokemon that could never touch Bonetail. Bonetail just eliminates this entire team with weakness policy over here. And yep, it just does. Shadow Bone, KOs. Yoshi will die to a couple of Shadow Bones. Yoshi can do something, right? It stays alive, it can knock off. However, it doesn't have an item. It's not doing enough, and then it just 2-hit KOs with another Shadow Bone. Did get the defense drop to be fair, but it's not like Yoshi would have beat it anyways. Shadow Bone one-shots Lubba, and then if it's got Earthquake, the Mollusk is dead. But regardless, there is no way a Mollusk is beating 5 whole other guys. And that's just how broken. You can just literally, you don't even have to hope that they don't know its weakness policy. You can just scare them from using knockoff the entire game because Bonetail just has weakness policy in the back. And it can punish so hard if you swap in on the weakness policy and no fast Pokemon there. Look at this stall, it's a stall team, so there's no speed on this team. So just literally getting weakness policy active is so scary against a team like this. And these replays essentially showcase how strong Bonetail is overall. A really annoying spin blocker, and at the same time can also be a really annoying sweeper. So it actually is really annoying to play around if you don't know the Bonetail set. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the VR. Now the VR has changed, actually. In the time where I'm making this video, the VR has changed. This was the previous VR. Let's see where the next VR puts Bonetail. This Bonetail is actually put at the top of S tier on this VR. Let's see where the next VR puts it. And of course, Bonetail is just put in the S tier as well. The top tier has not changed at all between these two VRs, and for a good enough reason, because I think Bonetail being the best mon in the entire tier, I don't think it's an entirely unfair rating, because Bonetail has so much versatility in what it can do. It's so good at everything it does. So I wouldn't put it at number one. My number one would be another mon. I think I'll reveal it when I rate the mon itself, when its video comes. But Bonetail, I think you can argue very easily that Bonetail is number one. and I'll take it. You know, I think it's a fair position to put it. And that covers Bonetail. Hopefully that helps anyone who was wondering how to use Bonetail well, or was wondering what Bonetail really did. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions. I'll see you next time with another Pokemon. The next one I'm going to cover, I'll just go in order from best worst on the tier list. I'm actually going to skip Exo because Exo has been banned, so I don't think it's worth covering for now, unless it gets unbanned. So I will skip it, and then the next one I'm going to cover is going to be Mollusk Lanceor. Please tell me in the comments if I butchered the pronunciation, because I do not know how to pronounce the second half of its name. But yeah, that's going to be it for me for now. Thanks for watching.